You do this report now every year, and this is the second year you've done the report in the middle of the pandemic. And Lareina, I'll start with you. When it comes to women being burned out, what interesting trends are you seeing, especially when you compare women's sentiment to men's?
Sure. So the burnout rates are higher and worse. And that's what you're getting at. So women told us that over the last year, 42% of them are experiencing burnout. And that number is higher than men and higher than last year. And the really interesting part of the story is why. And one of the things that's important to realize is that over the course of the last 18 months, women have worked harder in the workplace than men, and they are oftentimes less recognized. So what I mean by harder is that when the workplace disappeared and we had to restitch our ability to work virtually, and we had to figure this out in the midst of the pandemic, women stepped up to the challenge. They were more likely to help their teams figure out boundaries between work and home. They were more likely to provide the emotional support, and they were more likely to help them actually figure out the virtual model. And for all of that, only a quarter of them felt formally recognized in terms of their promotions, in terms of a pay raise, or just even the way they were recognized in a performance review. So by no surprise, of course.
Right. One of the main concerns is women backsliding in the pandemic, losing the progress they've made at work and at home. And Rachel, I want to bring you in on this point. Are you seeing that women, as a result of the pandemic, are actually falling behind?
So, Emily, that's what's really interesting. You know, we went into this year of disruption, not sure what we would see. And as Lareina said, burnout is absolutely on the rise, and we should be concerned about it. It shows it's a bellwether for the impact that pandemic is having on women and all employees. But the other thing we saw is there are actually small but important gains in the representation of women. During a time of disruption, we're still seeing advancement in the pipeline, and that's encouraging. But underneath that, there remain two very big problems. We still have the broken rung that we've been talking about for years. So women are far less likely to be promoted to manager, that first critical step up into management. And as a result, we really aren't able to make sustained progress because there's too few women to promote into more senior leadership roles. And then the progress mostly overlooks women of color. They continue to lose ground at every step in the pipeline. They lose more ground than white women and more ground than men of color. And so by the time you get to the C-suite, only 1 in 4 C-suite leaders is a woman, and only 1 in 25 is a woman of color. And so this balance of seeing some modest progress in the pipeline, but this continued burnout is something that companies need to be very aware of.
As we move to a remote work world, and we know that that's the way the world is going, there's a thought that this could be great for women because it offers them more flexibility. But on the other hand, it can be harder to raise your hand, harder to be noticed when opportunities are coming up. Lareina, what do you see as the potential cons to a remote work world longer term for women?
Well, the biggest thing is if companies don't recognize that a remote way of working is something everybody wants. So in our research this year, 90% of both men and women said they would at least like 1 day a week that's remote. So what companies haven't fully done is they haven't stared into what does a remote workplace look like? And that would allow you to start to answer the questions you're looking at, which is what are the new different types of inequities? If I have some people who are remote and some people who are in person, does that mean that the people in person have a leg up? Does that mean that they get more coaching and mentorship? Surely not. And so we have to take a look at how we rewire work. And that may also mean looking at performance reviews. How do we also equip our managers to not just look at the inputs, did you show up, but actually what were your results? And in this year, we saw that corporate results were fantastic. Companies did really well. And so they have to say, who's driving that? And in many cases, that answer is the woman.
Companies right now are reformulating policies. They're, going back to the drawing board. And I wonder what the advice is for managers in this moment, Rachel. I mean, I think a lot of people see a report like this and they wonder to themselves, what can I do? What can I do differently? Maybe I'm not the CEO, but I have a team or I see certain things are happening and I don't know what to do about it. What advice do you have for managers, Rachel, in this moment?
Emily, this is such a good question. One of the things we see is managers really feel like they're showing up, many of them. Now, women are doing better, but all managers feel like they're showing up. They say that they're checking in on their team's well-being. They're helping them manage work-life balance, helping them adjust workflow. But if you look at what employees are saying, that's not the case. The numbers drop. And so what I think is happening is managers are asking maybe here or there, but they're not being explicit enough in how they check in, and they're perhaps not doing it with enough consistency. So one example might be, instead of asking, are you burnout, or how are you feeling, or what's going on this week, get really clear about it. Are you green, yellow, or red when it comes to workflow this week? Or having people rate how they're feeling on a scale of 1 to 10. So you're creating space for the really difficult, really important conversations to have around burnout and well-being. And then you're also able to track some of that over time. So for me, it's really managers continuing to do what they're doing, but doing it with more consistency and doing it in a way that is more explicit.
A trend we've been talking about on the show is the Great Resignation, where you are seeing workers, men and women, leave companies in droves because they're taking this moment to reevaluate. Lareina, are you seeing a lot of women in particular resign? And do you think those women will ever come back to the workforce?
Well, in the corporate sector, we're seeing more of a pause. I would call it the Great Reflection. And it is incumbent on companies to decide whether they just want to wait that out or they actually want to interrupt it and make sure women stay. And so we have not seen 1 in 4 women leave the workforce, but we see the burnout, we see the work. And so you have to actually ask, what would you do to retain those women? What would you do to make the return on investment for them to stay more attractive? And one thing is that what the data shows in many examples is that there's a gap between positive intent and action. And I can think of lots of examples, but one is 80% of managers say they want to be allies to women of color. But if you ask a basic question, have you given an opportunity to a woman of color? Less than 20% of them actually do it. And there are many, many examples like this, Emily, and it's really getting at what is the day-to-day experience? And we have to start to bridge that gap between intent and action. Otherwise, women will go to your competitor or they'll start another business.